Tested methods to boost frames per second on weak GPUs and old CPUs. Windows tweaks, resolution scaling, upscalers, and settings floors that actually work on low-end PCs in 2026. Modern games ship with ultra presets that are built for RTX 4070 class cards. On a low-end PC, the first step is identifying which settings destroy performance and which ones you can leave at medium without penalty. In our testing across Fortnite, Warzone, and Valorant, these were the universal frames per second killers on cards like the GTX 1650 and RX 6500 XT. Shadows, low or off, plus 12 to 18 frames per second. Post-processing, low, plus 8 to 14 frames per second. View distance, medium, plus 6 to 9 frames per second. Anti-aliasing, TII or off, plus 10 to 15 frames per second on MSII or SSAA. Effects quality, low, plus 7 to 11 frames per second. Texture quality, medium is fine if you have 6 GB VRAM, low if 4 GB or less. These 5 settings alone took Warzone from, if you've already hit the settings floor and you're still under 60 frames per second, resolution scaling is the next lever. Rendering at 80% or 75% of native 1080p, so 1728 by 972 or 1620 by 911 internally, and using an upscaler to reconstruct the image back to 1080p can give you 20 to 35 frames per second on older GPUs. The catch is that not all upscalers work well on low-end hardware. FSR 2.x, AYMD, Fidelity FX Super Resolution, works on any GPU, including NVIDIA. Quality mode at 75% internal res gave us plus 28 frames per second on an RX 580 in Fortnite with minimal blur. Performance mode, 50% internal res, is too soft below 1440p native. DLSS, NVIDIA Deep Learning Super. A clean Windows 11 install in 2026 runs 60-plus background processes out of the box. On a high-end rig with 12-plus cores, that's noise. On a quad-core i5 or Ryzen 3, those background services steal 10 to 15% CPU and can cost you 10 to 15 frames per second in CPU-bound games like Warzone, Fortnite, and Valorant. The fix is a 20-minute debloat pass. Disable Windows Search Indexing, services.msc, Windows Search, stop, and set to disabled. Saves 3 to 5% CPU on HDDs and older SSDs. Turn off superfetch/sysmain, services.msc, sysmain disabled. Another 2 to 4% CPU back on systems with 8 GB RAM or less. Disable Xbox Game Bar and Game DVR. Settings, gaming. Outdated or corrupted GPU drivers are responsible for more low frames per second cases than any single settings tweak. NVIDIA and AMD both release game-ready drivers that include specific optimizations for new releases. On older GPUs like the GTX 1060 or RX 580, these optimizations can be worth 5 to 12 frames per second in recently launched games. Use DDU, Display Driver Uninstaller, to completely remove your current driver. Then install the latest version from NVIDIA or AMD directly. GeForce Experience and AMD software are optional. The driver itself is what matters. While you're at it, check your motherboard manufacturer's site for a BIOS update. A 2019-era BIOS on a 2026 system can bottleneck RAM speeds. There's a floor below which no tweak will help. If you're on a dual-core CPU, i3-7100, Athlon 3000G, or a GPU with less than 4 GB VRAM, GTX 1050, 2 GB, RX 560, 4 GB, modern AAA games simply won't run smoothly, even at 720p low. The workload is too large. At that point, your options are older/lighter games, cloud gaming services like GeForce Now, or saving for a used GPU upgrade. For the GTX 1060 6GB and RX 580 8GB tier, the most common low-end cards in 2026, you can still hit 60+ frames per second in Fortnite, Valorant, Apex Legends, and Warzone with the settings Floor and FSR quality. But Cyberpunk, build your free playbook for any GPU at betterfps.com/optimize.